infinite vastness of knowledge of the supremely divine. Again, be it Tao or God or what have you. The inherent self-negativity of this ultimate source of revelation and enlightenment has come to be beclouded by several misconceptions that Frank very illuminatingly discusses at the end of his book. The first and foremost prevalent is apophatism is nihilistic. This is on page 317. If one stays within the Western tradition alone, such a view might indeed be hard to disprove, especially without the comprehensive and guiding scholarship of someone such as William Frank. This is because the negative cannot stand for itself, but must be continuously contrasted with the positive approach to theorizing what at first blush appears to be beyond thought, right? If it's unsayable, how can we conceptualize it? How can we comprehend it? The second error, Frank says, on page 318, is that negative theology confuses our distinctions and blurs the clear lines of our thought. End quote. In order to overcome this, he continues, we need negative theology as the language of limits to keep open our negotiations between various positive formulations. End quote. Such was the case with Hegel, which explains why he could not push his argument for nothingness further than he did. It is also why contemporary thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre, Nancy, Marion, Merleau-Ponty, and to a certain extent Heidegger, could not see the negativity as a positive construct in its own right, but as a necessary precondition, as becoming, through which the permanence of being is reinforced. Taoism circumvents this barrier temporally and spatially by stressing the inseparability and mutual codependency of negativity and positivity. Together, they constitute what the Taoists call Tao, the source and reality of all things, and persist in harmony irrespective of man's doing. Negativity is thus freed from being negation in a void-like sense or annihilation by way of its otherness, and here I think of Levinas. Indeed, the only thing it signifies is its own self-presence, a groundless non-ground from which all grounding arises. And so, when Frank writes, quote, from page 320, and this is the conclusion, human being is characterized historically and essentially by its infinite openness to the infinite. It is the knowledge of what we do not know, or can only conjecture as the divine. That alone makes us human in this fullest and widest sense, end quote. I would have to protest, however, that framing the unsayable in terms of knowing the divine alone is to fail to take discussion of the unsayable to its rightful climax as thinking about the universe and the myriad things therein as a singular milieu in which all arising and returning occurs. The unsayable should be such not because we are incapable of realizing it in language, rather it should remain so insofar as silent equanimity lies at the heart of everything's inborn nature. Not to say is hence more powerful than saying, and the unsayable left alone is more symbolic than the sayable put into action. This is why apophatism has remained on the fringes of intellectual history, misunderstood and misused for so many centuries, and is why, ironically, we need more works like William Frank's A Philosophy of the Insane. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So it's very inspiring. Let's see who would like to.
Did we catch up on time?
We are pretty much only running late by an hour now. So
I read as fast as I could.
so I would like to begin.
Thanks. And thank you for this wonderful presentation. When you talk about the Hegel, and you see Hegel and Lao Tzu, and you see that this apophatic unsayability come from this negation, and also it's from this totality. And I always have this question when I hear the previous the paper here, talks here, is that this apophatic negation and contradiction are the same or not. Especially when we consider, let's see, the Hegel and Lao Tzu. Because what appears in my mind is the table I quoted in my talk about Kant. Kant make four divisions of the, let's see, the nothing. And only one of that can be seen as a contradiction. That is empty object without concept. All others, I think, can be seen as a difference. So then here, for this negation, the power or the force to drive this negation is really difference or contradiction. You see, if we say it's a contradiction, and then how can this totality can really hold? Okay, so that's about Hegel. Another thing is about Lao Tzu. Yes, Lao Tzu talk about this, we call the pairs, or this, we call the negation. But it contrasts the different elements. So, for example, the Lao Tzu said the negation, or the contradictory negation, or whatever, 反者道之动, the chapter 42. This 反 means the pair, or means contradict, maybe we cannot say contradiction. It's a contrast. Reversion. No, there are two meanings of it. One is it's like pairs, contradict to each other, or contrast to each other. The second meaning is reversion, return to the root. So in Chinese, one we call the 反对, another we call the 返回, 反复, 复返. But here we bring some kind of conception, the concept of root. It's return to the root. And the root means suggests very strongly about this teleological totality. Okay. And both Hegel and Lao Tzu does not really talk about contradiction, especially when we talk about the logical contradiction. Yeah. Otherwise, the totality cannot really hold. So how do you respond to this?
Well, I will defer Hegel to those who are more qualified to speak. In terms of Lao Tzu, part of my developing or creating this doctrine of meontology comes from what you mentioned in your talk, how we define the character Wu, right? Nothingness or non-being. Traditional idea is to equate them as one and the same. And you have other words for emptiness and so on. I read Wu as operating on two levels, ontologically as well as ontically. Ontically, it's the absence, the negation of things, lack of presence, in the Sartrean sense. Ontologically, then we can also split it into two, as non-being or as cosmological nothingness. Now the root you just mentioned, for me, that is cosmological nothingness. The primacy, the primal state of chaos, as you mentioned, from which all things arise. Now, then we can rebut and say, well, is that not creatio ex nihilo? But for me, in my definition of cosmological nothingness, it's not a negativity, it's a positivity. It's a positively creative potentiality, much like dark matter in space. Right? It's the medium in which all creation occurs. Now, whether you equate that with God or not, depends on your particular background, right? But strictly in terms of Chinese cosmogony, the texts are very clear. Being is born of non-being, right? But we can extend that further because the text says there was a time before Tao's existence, if Tao is ultimate reality, and it was simply empty, quiet, stillness. Now for me, I take that as the kind of ontocosmological nothingness, this primal nothingness, which I refer to with the word meontology. So we have various levels of reality all being applied to the singular Chinese word wu. And that's something that we don't find, unless I'm mistaken, in Western mythology. So there is no contradiction, because everything arises and returns, reverts back to a singular source, a singular root. So these opposite pairs are simply there to ensure balance and harmony throughout the universe. So you don't have domination of one thing over another. That's
Okay. Let me add one sentence just to push a little bit. My question is, this apophatic negation was motivated or caused by nothing as difference or nothing as contradiction?
For me, for Lao Tzu, I would defer to you or Hans George. I specialize in Zhuangzi, as you know. So I would say neither. Because in Zhuangzi we have the concept of non-words. Wu Yan. Now, it's not the denial of words, it's the opposite of words. It's the unspoken word that allows us to rest in inactivity, to contemplate, to experience everything as a oneness. That can only happen in states of stillness, silence, settling the mind, right? Zhuangzi talks a lot about that, quieting the mind, so it's not like a galloping horse and you lose sight or touch with everything. Lao Tzu is different because he's the predecessor of Zhuangzi, and his philosophy is more politically oriented, whereas Zhuangzi's is more personal enlightenment, salvation, and so on. So I would defer to the two Lao Tzu experts in the room, or others who have comments. As for Hegel, I cannot say anything on that. I am dumb to when it comes to that. So I think we should. Yes?
Yes, okay, so let's thank our speaker. Then we will have a small break, I assume not as long as originally proposed, and coffee's waiting here. As is our Macau specialty, the egg tart, so I recommend everybody who hasn't tried it to try an egg tart. They're both waiting outside, and then shall we start again in about 20 minutes? Or so at 20 to 5, then we have the last regular presentation by Professor Pohl, and afterwards then discussion.
I knew you'd ask me a hard question.
That question bothers me.
Seriously, your book is so full of material, it's impossible, because I am familiar with every thinker, and pick and choose is unfair to all the others.
I'm very happy that you went to the poetry. That's part of it. That's definitely part of what